Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing the documentary Wilding, directed by David Allan. So I really had mixed feelings about this documentary. On the one hand, I really enjoyed it, but I do have some pretty major problems with this film. It's based on the book Wilding, The Return of Nature to a British Farm by Isabella Tree. Believe it or not, Isabella Tree is not a pseudonym. It's particularly fitting given her work in nature and conservation. The book is about Isabella and her husband Charlie, who have this experience of kind of undertaking a radical ecological restoration project on their inherited family farm in Sussex. Now, at one level, I am the perfect viewer for this documentary. I have strong beliefs personally that we can't continue living as we are, both ecologically and economically. So I have a great personal interest in radical alternative ways of living. In this regard, I thoroughly enjoyed this film. What they undertook was a really interesting project. It's really informative and kind of educational. It talks about the impact of farming and how that is killing the soil, and how this then has a massive consequent impact on animal and plant life. They speak to this oak tree expert who was just fantastic. I wish we had more of him. He was almost like a tree whisperer. It was like he could kind of commune with the trees. We didn't get to hear him that much, but it would have been good. I've looked him up on YouTube since, and he's an interesting guy. But he spends a little bit of time explaining how oak trees are connected to each other and how they speak to each other. Just fascinating stuff. There were other really interesting things, like they wanted to release some beavers into the lake that they had there, and they had to wait 8 years from the government to get a license. And you just realize how sometimes regulation that's crazy to have to wait 8 years. There was you would think that it sounds like a really good project, but there actually was some opposition and voices of criticism of this project because it actually is really challenging industrial farming. At the same time, I found it personally quite inspiring, as it's people really walking the walk, exploring kind of alternative ways of doing things. Moreover, it was made in a really entertaining fashion. I did find it quite moving at times, and I was feeling a bit emotional when I watched this, so I don't know if this would have happened on a different day. But I was brought to tears at a couple of points in the film. The cinematography is fantastic. We get lots of shots of kind of early morning mist over the fields. It really captures the beauty of this amazing landscape. So far so good. Clearly, I really enjoyed this film. At the same time, I had some major problems with it. I saw this at the cinema, and that comes with a certain expectation. This is actually labelled as a documentary, and if I just watch this on YouTube, I might not be so tough on it. But given that it's being presented as a documentary film in the cinema, I feel like it needs to be critiqued. There were basically 4 problems that I had with it. The first problem was that as a documentary, it was really unreliable. It just wasn't objective. I do think at times it was almost like propaganda. It was manipulative. It was really romanticized and over sentimental. The music was over the top. It worked. It made me cry. But it definitely was too much and a little bit kind of almost superficial. The real Isabella and Charlie are in the film. It's kind of the story of their life. But there are also actors playing young versions of themselves. And this tree expert, who's called Ted Green, he also seemed to have an actor. I mean, at the end, I was trying to establish there's not even a proper cast list at the end in the end credits. I was trying to establish who were actors and who were the real people from the story. It was confusing. I think that the tree expert, I think he was in the film, but then there was also a younger actor playing him when he was younger. It's more like a feature film than a documentary. It's like there's lots of recreations and it strays into dramatization, which as a documentary for me really raises questions about its authenticity. This I found to be really problematic. Of course, there's no problem if this was just made as a dramatized version of the book, but making it as a documentary with the original people speaking, it's clearly a documentary rather than a dramatization. There's an interesting comparison here with the documentary that's on Netflix called The Biggest Little Farm, about some people. It's not exactly the same project, but some people buying a farm in California and trying to go back to traditional farming methods. And this is a pure documentary, but it's made to entertain. It's made as a Netflix documentary. I think that Wilding is trying to be more than this. It's more of an art house movie, actually, and indeed I saw it in Curzon, which is showing art house documentaries. The Biggest Little Farm, I think, despite this being kind of a Netflix documentary, was more authentic. This seemed to use all real footage of their animals and time-lapse photography, and it also made me think about the Indian documentary that I reviewed a while back on the channel, All That Breathes, where I actually commented on how much care they put into getting authentic shots of animals. Nothing was dramatized. They sat there for hours or left cameras there for hours, and it was kind of passive, careful observation. Wilding just feels so unnatural, and yeah, this just clashes with the whole idea of the project. The third problem I had with it, that I found it a little bit repetitive, and it was only 75 minutes, which was a good length. I did find it enjoyable, but there's a number of reveals in the film, and then something incredible happened. And the events are kind of incredible, but in a really gentle way. And the problem is with the over dramatization of the film and the spectacular kind of emotional music, the way it's presented like a dramatic film, it does create the expectation that more is going to happen. And it did indeed kind of feel like towards the end it was definitely losing its impact, which for an hour and a quarter film wasn't really very good. I think that the problem comes from the fact of this over dramatization, this kind of romanticization of it. I think it could have had a little bit less music, a bit less drama, a bit slower, perhaps a little bit more mindful. I'm thinking here of the documentary that I also did review on the channel, The Nettle Dress, which was also set in the Sussex countryside, but was a lot more kind of gentle and slower. I think that this documentary could just tone down the dramatization a little bit. And the fourth thing that came into my mind is the kind of privilege of these people. They live in this mansion and they've got this massive kind of estate, and the whole thing is a kind of pet project. And this level of privilege allows them to take these what are effectively significant financial risks. They're able to stop conventional farming, which of course, and this is probably why some people oppose the ideas in this film, that it could be untenable for smaller landowners or for those without substantial financial resources. You could say that they're not really providing a model for agriculture more generally. This is like some people living on this big estate that have the resources to try this grand project. The Netflix documentary that I keep mentioning, The Biggest Little Farm, is kind of more practical. they appear to start from nothing. They don't have any luxury or privilege of being purely non-commercial. So that is an interesting aspect of that documentary, that it does explore some of the conflicts between ecology and commerce. But what I would say about Wilding, it is connecting with something that is clearly beyond privilege. Although they have the resources to try an experiment like this, I think it's wrong to resent their privilege. They show what is possible, and they don't have to have all the answers in terms of providing a model for British farming generally. Overall, I would say that Wilding is well worth watching, but it is highly flawed. It doesn't quite work as a documentary because the dramatised elements are just a bit overdone. I think that without the dramatisations and the over sentimental music, this definitely is a worthy subject for a documentary, but it falls quite far short for me of where it could have been. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.